So somewhere around it's just like I felt so hard and she got me collectors, so like it's really cool. I understand.
Yeah.
There's like
I'm gonna see it both.
I know. I was the person. I thought I was really I'm like at my own putting them.
Okay, we're live now.
The boys like 20. Because I don't know.
I just thought, good, how are you? Are you on the way to Sipa? And Dawood Mirza is with you? Yeah, we're in Sipa 100.
Yeah, that's the class that I'm teaching.
You want to give an introduction to?
At least you want to say something. Waiting. I do that.
Go ahead. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are awaiting Dr. Mirza to come over. Prior to this, they were having lunch, so it is a trek from the faculty lounge here. So just want to share a little bit prior to this that we're going to stop the simulation for today only. We're going to start back again on Thursday. So for those of you who are in our class, simulation starts back on Thursday. And of course, as far as the game is concerned, game is still moving on. Okay. And this presentation, you can get a lot of insight out of that as well. And the reason for that is because some of those themes will be, those contested themes will be in this presentation as well. Okay. The idea of modernism as well as secularism is wide at play. You have seen it in your game. The INC, the Muslim League, is constantly playing into those themes. And so please take a whole lot out of this presentation. We're going to have moderation from our very own Dr. Labori. And of course, I want all of you to be interactive as far as this presentation is concerned. And try to ask the questions that will maybe give you guys a little bit of an edge in your simulation. And that's an important thing. So we're going to get started shortly. I think we're going to ask TJ to at least give some sort of an intro to Dr. Mirza before we really get into the fundamentals of the golden movement.
Speak to both Zoom and to class. Or maybe I ask. So Dawood Mirza will be joining us.
Can you take your speaker out?
Okay, how's it now?
Completely out. You have good speaking.
So.
Yeah.
Dawood Mirza is joining us from the University of Karachi and Aljamea-tus-Saifiyah, dual affiliation, both located in Karachi. We will be speaking today on the golden mean between secular and religious fundamentalisms by contrasting three major speakers within Muslim philosophical thought. The first being Abu Bakr al-Razi, who will be representing a form of secular fundamentalism. And they'll be presenting these contrasts as essentially one between religion and reason, or secularism and secular fundamentalism and religious fundamentalism. Representing secular fundamentalism will be Abu Bakr al-Razi. He'll be contrasted by the thinker, the theologian and Sufi Abu al-Ghazali, will be representing the religious fundamentalist position and the anti-philosophical position, as primarily explained through his Tahfut al-Falsafa, the incoherence or the missteps of the philosophers. And then we'll see how this can be reconciled, these two opposing positions, by the philosophy of Abu Nasr al-Farabi, who in his al-Madinah al-Fadilah expounds upon a philosophical conception of happiness, which is rooted simultaneously in the perfect exercise of reason, but maintains a central and essential position for revelation within this. So joined very shortly by Dawood Mirza to expound on this. One concepts to keep in mind during this are relationship between modernity and tradition, between authenticity, secularism, liberalism, modernity, state, religion, and empire. Sorry about the Nasir. How are you? No, it's fine. Thank you for being here. So we had it set up for you. And so you can operate the right to enforce if you want. Yeah, and, it's already picking up on the audio.
Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon. My name is Dawood Mirza and I am a lecturer at Arabic Academy in Pakistan, Karachi. And it's really good to be here. Thank you, Iqbal, for inviting me. If I here, always corresponded with me to set up this brief talk here. I will try to. Okay, so before I begin with, this is the topic I have written on, and I've gotten a paper published by the same topic. Now, I would not be reading out the paper here per se. I would just be discussing some points here, and I would like it to be a two-way correspondence here, a discussion here, instead of a discussion. So how I ended up with this topic is something I would like to begin with. I was heading to my university back there in Karachi one day. And it was the time when a group of hardliners there, they were protesting against the government of Pakistan to expel the French ambassador from Pakistan because somebody there made some cartoons and it offended them. So the roads were blocked. I missed my class because of that, and I had to leave out the way. So this was something that happened the day I went to the university. Just between the midway of the class, because I was late already. It was the time of the prayers. I excused myself. I went to the prayer room, and when I came back, and when the class was finished, some of my colleagues, they just remarked. I would not quote them. They were just telling me they were just curious to know that how do I adjust to this whole environment of these hardliners getting out in the roads against the government, and how do I feel as a Muslim here going for prayers between the class, and am I not scared of being recognized as part of them just because I am practicing some basic principle of Islam? So this was the whole episode that happened that day. And I discussed this with my professor there, and I ended up writing about this in the paper. So very quickly, okay. So this is something we come across daily in Pakistan and as a Muslim across the world as well. The first thing you would be asked back there in Pakistan would be, if you come out dressing like this, the first thing you would be asked is that if you are a Sunni or a Shia. This is the first thing they ask you. So you always face this question of trying to be relevant with the modern society and finding answers to the questions that come across you living in the modern times. So what I did was that I revisited the Islamic history and tried to find a philosophical approach to this problem of Muslim response to modernism. I wanted to find the roots of this rift, the roots of this confusion that has befallen the Muslim ideologies in today's world. So what happened, we all know about this, I will just go very quickly, that during the medieval period, religion was always at the center. Politics, the political realm always calibrated itself with the religion, be it Christianity, be it Islam, everything was centered, it revolved around religion. So the question of religion not being compatible to the political conduct was never raised during the medieval times. It happened with the separation of state and church. Okay. Muslims, the separation between the state and church happened while the Muslims were living under Islamic empires. So the stagnation was not noticed. It remained unnoticed until the fall of Ottoman Empire. What happened was that Muslims always had a state to go back to, always had a base to resort to. So the ideological stagnation was unnoticed. After the fall of Ottoman Empire, Muslims basically faced the wave of modernism and they had nowhere to go to. So this happened. This is the core, this is the focus of my paper, of my research, what I've done, is that the Muslim response overall split into two tendencies. People who resorted to the religious side, they rejected the wave of modernism and turned to the fundamentals of religion. Those who conceded to the idea of modernism, they went into the secular side. Now, these two tendencies got deeper. Now, fundamentalism is generally associated with anything that relates to religion and mostly violence as well. But fundamentalism in literal sense is anything that deals with the fundamentals of any principle or any idea. So the secular side, what happened with this paper is that when I talk about secular fundamentalism, people raise their eyebrows. How can a person being secular can also be a fundamentalist? But if a person who is resorting to the fundamentals of secularism, he is a secular fundamentalist. Just like a person who resorts to the fundamentals of religion can be called a religious fundamentalist. So this happened to the Muslim world, the Muslims overall, that they split into these two tendencies. Now, although they seem polar, although they seem opposite, going in opposite directions, I, in my observation, believe that they have one thing in common, which is fear. The Muslims who resort to the fundamentals of religion, they fear that if they harmonize with the modern world, they would have to compromise on the fundamentals of religion. They fear to lose the principles of religion. Those who resort to the secular side, they fear that if they continue practicing their religion or the principles of Islam, they would not be accepted in the modern world. So the fear, the element of fear, the sentiment of fear is common between the two tendencies. Now, this is the modern problem. I, in the first part, reviewed the Islamic history. What I did was that I studied the basic arguments of the religious fundamentalists, those who completely reject the progressive wave of modernism, the secular society. What they believe in principle is that in order to practice Islam properly, we need an Islamic state. This is what they believe. This is the common argument they would put up, is that in order to be a proper Muslim, you need an Islamic state. And in order to form, or in order to bring an Islamic state, we need to do what we need to do. This is what they believe. Now, Islamic history gives us a very different perspective. Islam was preached by the Prophet, peace be upon him, in Makkah before the establishment of the Islamic State. So he was preaching Islam, he was a Muslim before the establishment of the Islamic State. And the 12 years of the initial 12 years of Islam tells us that Islam can survive under a hostile environment. Although the secular society is not entirely hostile to religious activities, but still this part of Islamic history is usually overshadowed. Islamic history is usually narrated from the beginning of the Islamic State of Medina and the Hijrah. So the 12 years, the initial 12 years is a response to the religious fundamentalists that Islam can be practiced under a different political environment, a different political context. Okay. Now, responding to the secular fundamentalists who believe that Islam is not compatible to the modern world. So Islam brought about a wave of cultural, social, and economic progression to the Arabs. The whole idea of the preaching of Islam by the Prophet was to give Arabs that a progression in their lives, in their, okay. Sorry. So Islam, in essence, was brought to bring that progression to the Arab society. So it holds the essence of progression. Those who believe, the secular fundamentalists who believe that it is incompatible with the modern world, with the world which is moving ahead, which is progressing ahead, they have to review the Islamic history in this perspective. Now, what I did was that I reviewed this whole problem in a medieval framework. I took this entire issue 1,000 years back into history. And what I did was that I traced the roots of modernism, how the secular society, the modern society came about. I traced that. And I also traced the two tendencies of Muslim response to modernism, the same way I did with the idea of modernism. So modernism came in the wake of the Renaissance period, the Enlightenment, and which came on the basis of Greek sciences and intellectual heritage that came to the West through the Islamic society. So philosophy was my substitute to modernism 1,000 years back in Islamic history. I was viewing modernism as philosophy 1,000 years back in Islamic history. Just like Muslims are facing modernism today, the same thing was faced by Muslims in the guise of philosophy back then. Philosophy was something new to the Islamic world, just like the idea of modernism is something new. And they both bear the same roots. I decided to trace the secular fundamentalist idea of rejecting the religious principles and the practice of religion in today's world to the works of a certain philosopher, Abu Bakr al-Razi. Now, I would again repeat this, that we are going back in time, 1,000 years back. We are viewing philosophy as modernism. We are dealing with the works of al-Razi as giving out the tendency of the secular fundamentalists. And we will review the works of al-Ghazali, who, in my opinion, laid the foundations for the religious fundamentalism, which we have inherited that from the works of al-Ghazali. This is what I have done. And then I would review the works of al-Farabi at the end. So the works of al-Razi, Abu Bakr al-Razi, I would just briefly discuss a few ideas of these philosophers, and then I would come back to the works of al-Farabi, which is my solution to this problem. So al-Razi was a doctor. He was a surgeon. He used to practice medicine. He engaged with philosophy to an extent where he found that revelation in religion is invalid. Everything that matters is sciences. Everything that matters is philosophical inquiries. And revelation has no substance, or revelation has no relevance. He was saying this 1,000 years back. Some of his ideas are that he rejected the superiority of the prophets. He believed that anybody through intellectual inquiries can reach that level of producing what the prophets produced. The coming of universe, his idea of coming of universe was pretty much similar to the idea of Big Bang, which we discussed today. He didn't believe in the coming of universe as part of a divine plan. He believed that it just came suddenly because matter moved and the will of God approved the matter to evolve into the universe. This is his idea. Now, we don't have surviving works of al-Razi. And the interesting part is that all that has survived of al-Razi's works is present in those who critique him. So this is something ironic that those who wanted to critique him actually helped in preserving his works. He was also the person who argued against the unity of God. He proposed the five eternal theory. Now, why he did this is interesting. This is why Muslims today who somehow believe that Islam is something which should be relegated to a personal sphere of life instead of taking it into a political idea, taking it into a political realm. They believe al-Razi, why al-Razi proposed the theory of five eternals was that he was a physician. He was viewing, he was witnessing the sufferings, the pain, and he could not relate it with the God. He could not say that all this was happening with the will of God. So what he did was that he added 4 more elements to the existence of God so that we can relate whatever sufferings and pain and whatever wrongdoings that are present in the society to those 4 eternals other than the God. So this was the confusion he was in. And he ended up rejecting revelation and religion completely. Now, a couple of Fatimid missionaries have refuted al-Razi in their works. I would give the names later on. Now, coming to al-Ghazali. Now, this is interesting. What al-Ghazali did was that we are aware, I think everybody would be aware of his works, and a certain work titled Tahafutul Falasifa. It is translated as The Incoherence of Philosophers. Al-Ghazali wrote a treatise titled The Incoherence of Philosophers. His main aim was to refute Ibn Sina. Now, these are some of his arguments. I've just picked on some basic arguments to give an idea of how his ideology set up a foundation for the religious fundamentalists who are doing pretty much the same thing against modernism, which al-Ghazali did against the philosophy. So what al-Ghazali, I have titled the slide as al-Ghazali complex, because this is what I feel from his work. This is my opinion, of course. Rejection of necessary causation. What al-Ghazali did was that I would come to this example of cotton and fire. I think it would make it easier. Al-Ghazali believed that if you bring cotton to the fire in relation to fire, it would burn. Now, this is a scientific phenomenon. A scientific inquiry would merit that anything cotton brought in relation to the fire would burn. Al-Ghazali said that it is not appropriate to put it like this. It should be put it as that when cotton is brought in contact with fire, God wills that it has to burn. Otherwise, it won't burn. You cannot say that it's a scientific phenomenon for a cotton to burn when it comes in contact with fire. So this was his complex idea of reframing what we can reframe through a scientific inquiry, just because he wanted the revelation to be superior to the scientific inquiries and philosophies. Now, while he rejected the necessary causation, he argued the eternality of Quran. He said that Quran cannot be changed. Now, when we review this idea within the Quran and we attempt to answer the questions of those verses that contradict with each other, how would we answer the question? There is no answer to the contradictory verses if we believe in the eternality of Quran, unless you come to the interpretations and the meanings, which al-Ghazali rejected. He believed that the essence is below revelation. The medical problem also gives out the same tendency, that of the religious fundamentalist. Because like we discussed, that he rejected the idea of necessary causation, he believed al-Razi refuted miracles. Al-Razi was against the entire idea of miracles happening. He believed that it's a scientific phenomenon for something to happen. It's not a part of a prophetic doing to show a miracle. Ghazali put up a different argument. He was confused when talking about miracles. He wanted to, because he refuted necessary causation, he ended up undermining the significance of miracles. Because for a miracle to be a miracle, there has to be a necessary pattern. There has to be a necessary pattern in order for a miracle to be called a miracle, because something unusual is happening, which is not usual in the common pattern. So this was the idea of al-Ghazali. Now, in his work, Tahafutul Falasifa, the Incoherence of Philosophers, he has given out the same tendencies that the religious fundamentalists hold today. He didactically rejected the entire idea of scientific inquiries in his rejection of Ibn Sina. And this is what I have traced from the tendencies of religious fundamentalists today, that they hold pretty much the similar attitude against modernism, which al-Ghazali had back then, 1,000 years back, against philosophy and philosophical inquiries. Now coming to Farabi, this is the part where I have given out a solution to this problem. I have attempted to propose a solution to these two extreme tendencies and how can we deal with this problem in today's world. So because I traced back the two fundamentalist ideologies to the works of philosophers 1,000 years back, I did the same with the solution as well. So coming back to the title of the talk and the paper I've published, The Golden Mean, I believe that what al-Farabi has written in his treatise, The Virtuous City, is something we can try to incorporate in our response to modernism as being Muslims or as being a part of any religion whatsoever. So I would just jump to this. I think the fonts are messed up. Okay. So al-Ghazali, who is also called as the second master, okay, the first master being Aristotle, he's called the second master. How al-Ghazali engaged with philosophy, I'm just summing this up with the solution that the way al-Farabi engaged with philosophy is something we should adopt in our engagement with the modernism and the modern society. So what al-Farabi did was that he was a Muslim and he engaged with philosophy in a way that would complement his ideas of Islamic values and principles. So I would give an example. He adopted al-Farabi has written a treatise titled The Virtuous City, the inhabitants of the virtuous city. He has proposed a utopian society, the idea of a utopian society, where everybody is living in cooperation with each other, and they are the most happiest of people living in that society. So he gets these ideas from the works of philosophers. He engages with philosophy in order to complement his beliefs in Islam. So Plato has proposed the idea of philosopher king as being the righteous ruler of any society, right? So what al-Farabi did was that al-Farabi adopted this idea instead of rejecting it like al-Ghazali did, and instead of just completely taking it as al-Razi did, undermining religion, he did that he attempted to blend the idea of Plato in his version of a perfect ruler of a society. What he proposed was that just like Plato said that the perfect ruler should be a king who is also a philosopher, al-Farabi said that the perfect ruler should be a king who should also be a philosopher, and this person can only be an imam. He incorporated the Greek philosophical ideas into Islam in a way that complemented his beliefs and faith. Now, this is the entire summary of the virtuous city. I would go quickly here. That just like I said, he incorporated the idea of philosopher king and he interpreted it, he presented it in his treatise as prophet, imam, and philosopher king. So the methodology of al-Farabi in his engagement of philosophical works is something what we need to do in today's world. We need to be open to the modern ideas. We need to be open to the secular society so as to complement what we have as a roots in Islam. This is what al-Farabi teaches us in his methodological approach with philosophy. Now, this is the entire sequence of his treatise, al-Madinah, al-Fadilah, the virtuous city, that it starts with a house. Those people living in a house initially has to adopt this approach in order for a street to adopt the same thing, then a village to adopt the same ideology, then a city, then a nation, and then the world. So it starts with the house. What is happening today when I reviewed the literature, what I saw is that this entire discussion is happening a lot. We come across the same discussion in a lot of works, in a lot of research papers today. But everything has been, what I found was that everything was being written from a perspective of a ruler or those who devise the policies. And nothing was being written as a lay Muslim who wants to remain a devout Muslim or a religious person in today's world. So this is how I ended up engaging with al-Farabi's work. He believes that in order to achieve the idea of virtuous city, it has to start with a house. So we, as an individual, can relate to this. We don't need to be a stakeholder, or we don't need a position in the political hierarchy of Islam to start building up a virtuous society and a virtuous world. So this triangle is what I believe is the solution to these two extreme ideas. What al-Farabi believes is that the key to happiness, he adopts the idea of happiness from Aristotle. He believes that he has translated the whole idea of happiness as knowledge. In al-Farabi's work, happiness is equivalent to knowledge. Anybody who is in pursuit of knowledge is in pursuit of happiness. So what he believes, al-Farabi, is that the inhabitants of the virtuous city, which are also just a household, what they need to do is that they need to adopt cooperation. They need to reject the isolationist attitude, which, in my opinion, lies at the heart of the fundamentalists today. The isolationist attitude, the isolationist approach, the fear which I spoke about earlier. So what al-Farabi proposes that in order to be in pursuit of happiness, we always need to be in cooperation with each other. And that cooperation can be given and can be maintained with the help of a perfect ruler, who with the inhabitants can reach the goal of ultimate happiness, which is the pursuit of knowledge. So this is how I believe that we can get to a perfect solution to the problem of engaging with the modern world. What we need to do is that we need to be open in our approach towards learning from the modern society and incorporating the modern values within the ideas of Islam, within our belief within our faith, within our principles. The basic thing that al-Farabi has given through his treatise is that one needs to be rooted in principles and then needs to engage with philosophical ideas, so that his principles are being complemented by the philosophical sciences and the philosophical inquiries. So his idea of a perfect ruler, he gives an analogy of a human body. He proposes, he discusses that just like a human body with organs having differences between each other, they strive for a unified goal. They strive together to reach to a certain cause. That is how the inhabitants of the virtuous city needs to be in their approach towards philosophy. And coming back to the modern world, this is how we need to engage with the secular society and the modern world today. So now, back there, I basically gave the same presentation around the same subject, and I got a couple of questions there in my university. They wanted an example of how how we can devise a perfect balance. How can a perfect balance be? How can we create this balance in today's world? It sounds good. It sounds interesting, but is it even possible to be a complete Muslim while also being open to the modern world? How is it possible? So what I did is that I come here with an example. Now, this quote, this is a quote from the late leader of our sect. This is what he has written and what he has delivered. So the problem is here, I would read this out, that I have quoted this here as part of a solution. How are we supposed to engage? How are we supposed to approach modernism? And in a way that complements our belief and not giving up on what we believe as Muslims. So this is what he told about the English language today. English is an integral element of modern society. Now, how are we supposed to engage with English, being Muslims? So this is what he actually quoted. I would just read this out. That Islam and its Sharia have suffered at the hands of those who have failed to understand it and those who refuse to know its beauties and virtues. The criticism leveled against it is either intentional or unwitting. It is therefore necessary that assault on Islam should be met firmly and effectively through the medium of English, which is today an international language. Yet we know that the many beauties of the Arabic language. Now, the root here is Arabic language. It is the language of Islam. We are not supposed to give up on Arabic in today's world. I was talking about this with Professor Iqbal a while ago, that we are not supposed to give up on Arabic, but we are also not supposed to oppose the English language because it is an international language today. We will need to engage with English in order to be a part of today's world. So what he proposed was that in order to guard their excellent characteristics, the characteristics of Arabic and connotations, we must resort to the building of Islamic English so that our aim is realized and at the same time Al-Quran is revered and sanctified. So what he proposed is that there is no harm in learning English. There is no harm in speaking English. There is no harm in discussing the beauties of the English language. But as Muslims, as being Muslims, we need to safeguard our heritage, the Arabic language and its traditions. So he proposed the idea of Islamic English. Now, how one is supposed to devise the balance is very interesting. That while talking about anything related to Islam, we would speak in English. There's no harm in speaking in English. We would use English language to our benefit. We would respect the language. But while talking about God, we would prefer using Allah. While talking about the place of worship, we would prefer using masjid. And this is how we would contribute to the lexicon of English language. Instead of opposing the entire language completely, we would engage with it in a way where it is serving our cause and we are contributing towards it with our beliefs and principles. So this is how I have dealt with 3 philosophers and their works to try to take a problem back 1,000 years and try to glean out a balanced approach and a solution to the problem which is very prevalent in the society today. This is what, and I would like the questions to come now.
Okay, so you were mentioning about like Islamic English and how
If everybody asking questions can speak up so the microphone.
Yeah, the microphones are.
oh, okay. So you were talking, you want to be too loud.
You never really know have an issue with
You know,
words.
I don't want
Come on,
to.
project.
So you were talking about Islamic English and how in order that you propose the idea of, for the sake of communicating the Quran's beliefs, you would be open like to talking in English, but when talking about God or Allah, then you would prefer to speak in the original language. So would it, in your eyes, I guess, be acceptable if someone only speaks English to talk about Allah in English, or would that be considered disrespectful? Like how would you handle that?
I don't think so. I think if I'm using the word Allah while speaking in English, is because I'm a Muslim. And this is my belief and this is my conduct that I would prefer, that is why I said I would prefer using the word Allah instead of saying that I should be using the word Allah. So if I hear the word God, obviously it's part of the English language and you don't know it. So why would you use any other word? So I don't think I would consider that disrespectful.
A question?
This is kind of concerning to something you said in the very, very beginning of your presentation. I know that you had said, I don't remember the names of the 2, but when you said you speak to certain people, they would ask you whether you are
A Sunni or a Shia.
Right, right. And I was just wondering whether or not at times you would kind of feel like you would have to identify with a specific thing for your own safety, or whether or not you felt like they kind of needed to get along with this person for whatever reason. Did you ever feel the need to like almost kind of lean towards one side or the other?
This was something I was discussing a while ago with my sister there. That I think that we should be letting the differences be
Right.
there and finding the point of finding the common ground. Like I would like, coming back to your question, the late community leader, this is very interesting. When the late community leader, Dr. Sayyidina Tahir Saifuddin, he visited Pakistan once and he was asked the same question, that whether I belong to a Shia Muslim community. He was approached by a scholar and he was asked the same question, that whether he was a Sunni or a Shia. What he replied was that while amongst the Shias, I am the best of Shia. While among the Sunnis, I am the best of Sunni. Because my point, the common ground between me and a Sunni is the Prophet. I believe in him. Let the differences be. We believe in the same Prophet. We should be going back there. Instead of the differences between us, we should be finding the common ground. And the common ground is the Prophet. You believe in the same Prophet, I believe in the same Prophet. While with the Shias, they believe in the family of the Prophet. We believe in the family of the Prophet. Let the differences be. Let's just come to the common ground. Why talking to somebody who's not a Muslim? So we have a common ground as humans. I think this is what we need to develop in ourselves as our approach towards questions like these. That we need to go back to find a common ground and respect the differences. So I don't find myself as being inclined to any side in this situation. I rather try to get along in a way where I can connect with the person who's asking the question.
So in a way, like your differences don't necessarily matter.
I think they don't matter. They hold their own value, but they don't matter to a point where I need to, compromise on anything else.
Right.
They matter, they hold value, but not to an extent where I need to react to somebody or I need to react in a particular way.
Well, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So kind of along the same lines as what Chloe was mentioning, you were, I'm saying, like focusing on the similarities and the common ground of someone else that you might not have a relationship with, where a disagreement could come across more severe than you might initially intend. But at what point would you say that these differences do need to be addressed?
The differences definitely they need to be addressed.
Yeah.
But addressed in a way where we are not losing the common ground again. They need to be addressed in a way where we are not losing the whole point of the cooperation again, which I spoke earlier. The whole point of cooperation is it rests on this idea that we need to respect the differences, get along with the differences while being rooted in a common ground. And this is what I believe, that a tree with roots 1,000-year-old can bear fresh fruits in all times. Like being a complete Muslim, being a devout Muslim is perfectly, it's completely possible in today's world. Why is it not possible? I don't seem to understand this. We don't need to compromise on our beliefs in order to blend with a set of principles set by the modern society. That's what I believe. I hope I
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for exposition of Farabi and Ghazali. Please, gracias. My big issue with your presentation is your last one. The first one. But when you engage with the modern world, as you claim, right, the Muslims, it seems that Islam has to be willing to learn from the modern world. And it has to be willing to change. Otherwise, there is no real dialogue, right? It's a one-way street. But in your presentation, you were very vague about what would it entail to engage the modern world at a very serious level. I'll give you an example. We have in America something totally analogous, comparable to what's happening in fundamentalism. In fact, the word fundamentalism was coined by Americans, not by Muslims. It's an American word from 1900. But one of the big problems that American fundamentalists have is that they're not willing, they want to hold on to the old time religion, right? To the faith once and for all delivered to the saints. But when they talk about engaging the modern world, there's no real engagement. So we have to learn about evolution. Evolution challenges perhaps some of the major tenets of any religion. So fundamentalists simply say we reject evolution, right? We reject modern science, or we accept modern science provided it agrees with our religion. In Islam, there's this concept of ijma, consensus. I find that concept incredibly important because it allows Islamic consensus to change over time and to learn and adapt and take seriously what the modern world has to say to it. But Islam has to take the risk to change. But it seems in your presentation that you are simply the engagement with the world that you are articulating seems to be totally vacuous. You're not going to yield any of the fundamental principles. And without really willing to yield some of the fundamental principles, there is no real engagement with the modern world.
So what I spoke earlier in the presentation is that those who hold on to the fundamentals are actually fearful, which you spoke about, that they are fearful of the change and in whatever way the modern society would affect their Islam, their version of Islam. So they are definitely fearful of losing the fundamentals of Islam, and that is why they are against any change. But what I was proposing in the second part of the presentation was that when you say that Islam needs to be changed, is because you believe that Islam needs to harmonize with the modern times, right? This is what you are proposing. That in order to blend with the current times, Islam has to learn from the modern society, so as to be relevant in today's world. What I believe is that Islam has already given a set of principles that can be changed, that can be just like Salat. I always give this example. Islam has defined a complete way of praying, Salat, namaz. If you are not able to stand and pray, you can sit and pray. If you are not able to sit, you can lie down and pray. So I, as a Muslim, believe that Islam has already incorporated the essence of flexibility and adopting change in it, where it has given it. We just need to review ourselves as Muslims in today's world, and just need to engage with the modern world with this view. What you're saying is completely right, that we need to learn from the modern society is absolutely right. We need to do that, but with an approach, with confidence. I would use this word, because as a Muslim, I would say that I need to be confident in the completeness of Islam if I am a Muslim. And I need to engage with the modern world with a view that I don't need to fear, because I believe that Islam is complete. And if I am open to the modern world, it would not bring any fundamental changes in my principles and beliefs.
But would you be willing to alter Sharia, for instance?
What sort of alteration are you referring to is what I would ask. What sort of alteration? What
In
is
principle,
there? This is a question I would need to I'd like some discussion on this. What sort of alteration is required? Because we think that this cannot be practiced today. What is there in Islam which you believe that needs to be altered because it cannot be practiced today?
Should women be imams? Should they be allowed to be imams?
Now this again is a question where all the different sects would have a different view.
Your view?
My view is that those who believe that women should lead a prayer, I would not go stopping them. I would not imply to all the sects for it to happen. Now, this is what the problem with the secular fundamentalists is. They call themselves secular. They call themselves secular to a point where they are appreciating differences, but they are appreciating differences in their own way. They want a particular change to happen in their own way. Just like religious fundamentalists are holding on to their fundamentals, I think that this tendency is also doing the same. Just like I hope I was able to address.
Thank you.
Forgive my ignorance, but does it say a woman cannot be, what was that, imams in the Quran?
I don't think it has been mentioned.
We have a question from online. This is from Nasir Muhammad. It says, Salam, what an enriching lecture. Congratulations and many thank yous. Is al-Ghazali still relevant in a scientific age that we live in, especially when seeking the cardinal question of the existence of God? Also, how is he viewed reacted to by the various major branches of Islam and most importantly, by Western Christian world that believes in rational discourse, thanks to Aquinas. Lastly, if we believe him that reason is inferior to revelation, do you think the privilege of revelation is accessible to the common man in today's fast-paced capitalism?
That's the
Interesting.
question.
Yeah.
It's coming from Pakistan.
Okay. So I think there were a lot of questions there. I will start with the last one.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
So
reason and revelation.
reason and revelation. I again would say that we, as a Muslim, as a follower of Islam, and not considering myself as leading an Islamic community or a society, I would think that we need to be rooted in our belief. If the question of Ghazali's relevance was there, I think Ghazali was right when he said the Quran is eternal. Quran is eternal. I do believe that it is eternal. So how I am supposed to engage with reason and scientific inquiries in today's world would be in a way that I would depart of the base of my belief that Quran is eternal. Revelation is above reason. The prophets were above the philosophers of the time because they experienced revelation. They were above that. Now, if I'm not able to understand that, it is because of my own ability of reasoning. So I would openly engage with scientific inquiries, but not to a point where I would start questioning revelation. So I think both are doable. We can as Muslims engage with scientific inquiries and also believe that revelation is above reasoning. We can do that.
So moving that a little bit forward, so my reading of incoherent philosophers is more of an epistemological argument.
Yes.
Right. I think you just touched upon that right now. And so when the engagement is happening, what Ghazali is talking about is that you should not be telling me about my Allah. In the sense of math, philosophy, science, however. Is that still hold true in your paper, which I barely skimmed? I did not have a chance to go over, but do you also believe in that same framing? That what he was talking about, especially with the basically was that none of the worldly knowledge that you have gone ahead and accumulated, whether that be from the Greeks or do not translate that into the eternal knowledge.
I think that's why I titled the slide as al-Ghazali complex. What he did was that he was fearful of these inquiries. He was not completely rejecting them. He was fearful that if we promote these inquiries, what if people end up completely rejecting revelation? What would happen then? So that is why he was again completely, he proposed being completely against philosophical inquiries because he was fearful. Not that that has happened. Philosophers, on the other hand, has never argued that revelation is below philosophy, below reasoning. They have never done that. But al-Ghazali was in complex that what if that happens? But I believe, if you ask me, I think it would never happen. It would never happen.
Thank you for your insight. It was excellent. I have a two-part question. I hate two-part questions, so I just want to start it there. But I think I need to preface it in order for you to better understand what I think I want to get to. And your statement about revelation and reason. I'm curious, in Christianity, there's a verse that talks about man's inability to understand God's mind and how he reveals scales, right? The scales fall from your eyes, and that's when things are revealed. How does identifying that revelation is above reason, and that reason cannot understand, appreciate the beauties and virtues of revelation, how then does one validate or investigate something blasphemous towards revelation or not, if reason cannot be right, if reason's honest? So the two parts are, how do we get to that? And then where, I guess, where does blasphemy lie in?
I would try to address this question. What al-Farabi, I missed this part. How he characterizes the ruler of the virtuous city. I would come to this now. Because in order to devise this balance, a ruler has a crucial role to play. Okay, so how al-Farabi has characterized the ruler is that a perfect ruler is, I think I have quoted him here as well. Happiness is achieved by men not in the ideal but in the material order. That a perfect ruler is someone who balances between revelation and reason. Because not everybody can experience prophethood. Okay, so if somebody who is able to accept revelation, he is supposed to be capable of translating it into reason in order for people to understand. This is how it works. This is what the prophets have done. They have translated the revelation in an understandable way that is compatible to our level of reason. So the part of your question is, I think, more relatable to who we follow than how we follow. Because our reasoning, to an extent, might have limitations. Okay. And we also concede to the fact that it is not everybody's ability to experience revelation. Then there has to be someone we need to follow. So I think that's where the answer of your question lies.
I have a question about the five eternal theory. So when al-Razi came up with that, did he intend for it to work within Islam or completely contrast it? Or like, do they go? Can they coexist?
He was called the heretic back then. Just like anybody who would contest religious ideas would be called. So he was from an age where he had to be within the boundaries of Islam. So he was called a heretic. He was rejected by the Islamic society.
And then
This is how it happens today, right?
my other question is, how would you go about combating the fear in both secular fundamentalism and religious fundamentalism? How would you say that people should start overcoming that fear?
I think in order to overcome this fear, one needs to be confident in what he or she believes. This is the core solution. One needs to be confident. When I am confident as a Muslim that Islam is, that is what I attempted to answer to the question by him. That I need to be confident in what I believe. I don't need to be fearful coming here, engaging with anybody, any of you all, with the fear that anything would contrast my belief and it would end up changing it. And in the same way, I don't go I don't go about attempting to change people. So I think in order to combat fear, we need to be confident in what we believe in practice, and also always be in the pursuit of learning what al-Farabi tells us. If one is always in the pursuit of learning, I think learning the strive for knowledge gives us the humility to engage with whatsoever period of time, do whatever we want, while being a complete Muslim or being a religious person. This is what I term as the consistent old and the beneficial new. The old has to be consistent, we need to be confident on it, and also seek for the beneficial new. Yes.
Same point, and not isolated to Islam. I wouldn't generally with faith in general. I would say that having that that confidence, I find that difficult to reconcile with true inquiry. With true inquiry, right?
Okay.
So having that base of strong confidence in whatever your belief is, I find it as a hindrance into having true, pure inquiry.
Okay, this is interesting. So I don't I'm not phrasing it in a way that being confident means to not allow inquiries or be biased towards what we believe. Because if I think both of these things go hand in hand. Because if you are not confident in what you believe and you attempt to go into inquiries, you would end up in confusion. You would find yourself either on this fundamentalist side or this fundamentalist side. So this is, I think something we need to work on to develop in ourselves, that while we are confident in what we believe, we also need to respect inquiry. We need to respect the questions that come across our beliefs, our values, and try to address them in a way that is not inclined towards the fundamentalist tendencies.
And its confusion would then be perceived as like a danger or negative.
I think being slightly in this confusion is better than turning violent towards others. I would say, I would phrase it like that. So I think trying to find answers is better than imposing answers on others or completely rejecting questions.
But like I said, it's not isolated to.
Yes.
Dr. Misbahi.
Thank you.
It sounds to me that boundaries of those boxes that you joined are not equal
Yeah, then
to the last one. The last one is about political power. I don't think this articulation is that the tolerance within the home, within society, the streets, is facing an autonomous space. What rules over there is fundamentally different in many respects. Whether the ruler is a good person, that's philosophically pretty important. And that is why I think Plato doesn't let go of the philosopher king, because he's hopeful that the king would be a philosopher would control himself or herself or whatever. And then Aristotelian approach is that we have to control this state, division of labors and powers. So the notion of tolerating other points of view is fine. But this is not just a societal issue. Fundamentalism of either side is completely geopolitical, has been and is and will. So the takeover of the state by this notion, utilizing that either with the belief system or as an instrument of practice, is fundamental to the breathing space of either side of this. So I think any solution has to have an understanding. What are you going to do in the political space? Rulership of society, but either based on belief system or through instrumentalism, use fundamentalism for the secular or otherwise to grant its there that any fundamentalism, the secular or Islamic religions, has to have a space for the notion of resistance, check and balances, and doing something about that political space and not be quiet. That's the biggest challenge for Muslims. What are you going to do with the ultimate box that decides everything else? I don't think that whether al-Razi or Farabi or whatever, they don't want to deal with that. He says the virtuous person has to have a balance. Good solution. Self-control.
He has dealt with the problem politically as well. He doesn't believe that he defines 12 qualities of a perfect ruler in this treatise. Because I have intended to approach the entire question from a lay Muslim's perspective. I didn't want to go into the political side of it.
There is no such a thing as a lay person. I'm sorry to say that. These are layered boundaries, layered boxes. They don't need separation from each other. So whatever theory we have to make sure that somehow we address the questions of big box, politics, which affects every other box, from family, from individual to street to society and everything else. So to ignore that because there is no solution for that solution requires an element of justice, resistance, change, transformation, revolutions, whatever. To avoid that, I think it would deprive you from understanding what happened in Medina versus Mecca. Mecca was the easy part. Medina is harder. But Medina is about rulership. Now you have a community with boundaries. There's a city. Somebody comes and wants to kill you. You have an army. What are you going to do about that? But justice, how about the court? So the prophet becomes by definition or by force a ruler. Now he has to say something. And that is why I think fundamental to Medina project, the Medina state is a secular state. Theologically, a secular state, not secular secular state. Theology, and that is why we have to look into Medina as more important than Mecca. Not that it's impossible to be like a Muslim. What happened in a country, that state, that government, president, thank you very much. All right, thanks.
I was like, we're